actually mean to be redeemed? We're talking a lot about how the Bible is breaking down what is to be redeemed or delivered. So in what context does this actually apply? If everything that we have been reviewing thus far, if everything that the Bible has been saying is related to the conversation, and not primarily to the human being first, which absolutely goes against everything that we traditionally hold to be true. Because if we're going to follow along the lines of the traditional strain of thought, it is that we are to be redeemed. We, our human being, is the primary object. The goal of the offering, the goal of the crucifixion was the us, the primary us. If we're following the traditional strain of thought, but according to the Bible, that's not the truth. That's not, according to the Bible, fact. According to the Bible, the benefit of that crucifixion secondarily falls to us, primarily falling to our conversation. Our conversation is to be redeemed or delivered. Our conversation. And it is from the deliverance of the conversation, it is from the redemption of the conversation that our human being is then affected. That our human being is then better. That we then becomes the eye of affection for health. But first off, according to everything that we have been saying, and according to everything that we have been reviewing, and according to everything that the Bible has articulated, the mind within the Bible is concerned with the context, with the nature, with the estate, with the constitution of our conversation. And that concern falls down to what is called redemption, our redemption. So if we're reading in the book of Ephesians, Paul saying, put off the former conversation, the old man, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind. If we're hearing in John 3 verse 6, that which is of the flesh is flesh, that which is of the spirit is spirit, there is a blatant division between us and between our conversation. The Bible primarily or firstly highlighting our conversation to be the beneficiary of what these words are offering. And so what does it actually mean to be redeemed? What is the context in which redemption is to occur? Because we understand from a traditional lens what that redemption, we have an idea. The theology isn't difficult to grasp, but it's flesh-based. So we can conceptualize that stimulus or that flesh-based aspect of us primarily being the center of the redemption. And this falls back onto our last time together, where the Western perspective, looking at the Bible from a Western perspective, means looking at the Bible from a self-centered point of view. The self-centered point of view is the us. The human being is the self. It is the us. It is us that is the center of redemption. It is us that is the center of deliverance. It is us that God has done everything for. Us, our human being, us, our soul, within the human being, us primarily, us, ourself. But if we're going to follow along the narrative of the Bible, again, this narrative is not the same narrative of what the traditional Christian thought is. According to the narrative within the Bible, the conversation is to be redeemed. And this is a little bit more technical, and this is, well, not a little bit, but a lot of bit different than what we know. Because while our general thoughts have us weighing the redemption or the escape of the crucifixion to be for our natural self, we have the Bible relating the illustration of the crucifixion to the redemption or the rescuing of our conversation. And so when it comes to this rescuing, what does it mean? What does it mean to be redeemed in this sense of what the Bible is saying? So to get a context, let's just look at a couple of verses. In the book of Deuteronomy chapter 15 and verse 15. Deuteronomy chapter 15 and verse 15. Deuteronomy 15 and verse 15. And thou shalt remember that thou was a bondman in the land of Egypt, and the Lord thy God redeemed thee. So off the gate, no matter what illustration that you go to, the issue of redemption is connected to the issue of slavery. The issue of redemption is connected to the issue of slavery. Deuteronomy 9:26, I prayed therefore unto the Lord and said, O Lord God, destroy not thy people and thine inheritance, which thou hast redeemed through thy greatness, which thou hast brought forth out of Egypt with a mighty hand. Again in the book of Micah, Micah chapter 6 and verse 4. Micah chapter 6 and verse 4. For I brought thee up out of the land of Egypt and redeemed thee out of the house of servants, and I sent before thee Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. So again, the Bible just articulating the fact that whatever redemption is connected to, it is to resurrecting from out of the house of slavery, the house of bondage, from no longer being a servant to being independent of servants. This is key. Again, the book of Nehemiah, Nehemiah chapter 5 and verse 8, Nehemiah chapter 5 and verse 8, and I said unto them, we after our ability have redeemed our brethren the Jews, which were sold unto the heathen. And will you even sell your brethren? Or shall they be sold unto us? Then held they their peace and found nothing to answer. Again, we cannot escape redemption, slavery. Slavery, redemption. Redemption, house of servants, and it's an escape from the house of servants. The book of 1 Chronicles 17, 21 and 22. The book of 1 Chronicles 17, 21 and 22. The book of 1 Chronicles 17, 21 and 22. And what one nation in the earth is like thy people Israel, whom God went to redeem to be his own people, to make thee a name of greatness and terribleness by driving out nations from before thy people, whom thou hast redeemed out of Egypt. For thy people Israel did you make your own people forever, and thou, Lord, became their God. Final verse, Isaiah 52. Just a final verse. These verses illustrating that separation between slavery and deliverance. You can't make it. There's no separation. It is consistent. Isaiah 52, 2 and 3. Isaiah 52, verses 2 and 3. Shake thyself from the dust. Arise and sit down, O Jerusalem. Loose thyself from the bands of thy neck, O captive daughter of Zion. For thus saith the Lord, you have sold yourselves for naught, and ye shall be redeemed without money. So just wanted to give these examples because the Bible defines things on its own. We don't have to step outside of the Bible to have a definition concocted for us or for us to gather a definition. Everything we need to answer the Bible is within the Bible. And context matters. And so the context of redemption has everything to do with liberation. And not simply just liberation, but liberation in another context of religious slavery. Liberation from religious slavery. And so when we're thinking about redemption, when we're thinking about what is to be redeemed, with the Bible's issue primarily being alleviation, deliverance, or liberation from religious slavery, we cannot take that context and shift it to something secular as is our biology, or our super biology, however you want to phrase it. It has to remain in the context of the Bible primarily in order for it to make contextual sense. According to the Bible, the redemption to be concerned with has to do with our conversation. If concerned with our conversation, then the redemption to be concerned with has everything to do with what slavery to spirituality or religion we are tied to. Exodus is the point of redemption. Exodus is the point of redemption. The conversation to be redeemed is a conversation to exercise itself in an exodus. Exodus from one point of slavery out into another point of liberation. Now, how does this make any sense? In the book of Isaiah, we were just in the book of Isaiah 52. Now we're going to jump back to Isaiah 42. Isaiah 42, verse 22. Isaiah 42 and verse 22. Isaiah 42 and verse 22. But this is a people robbed and spoiled. They are all of them snared in holes, and they are hid in prison houses. They are for a prey, and none delivers, for a spoil, and none says, restore. Now the Bible is making a very, very clear point. We just read about Egypt and the liberation there. Isaiah is using the idea of that same slavery, but not in the same physical context. The context is changed. The illustration remains. The context is changed. No longer physical is the slavery. The slavery is now mental. The slavery is now mental. And the slavery is now confined to prison houses. House in the Bible is a connotation for church. In the book of Timothy, we find Paul saying that he is writing for the church of God, which is the house of the living God. In the Bible, church always equates to house. House always equates to church, because this is the Bible. These words and the illustrations here are firstly religious. I don't like that word. Maybe spiritual, no. Philosophical, doctrinal. Secondarily, they relate to the secular world. So when we're hearing redemption, our immediate go-to for this term is secular. Secular meaning we naturally are to be and to experience redemption. Now, in the Bible, that context and that narrative is different. What is to be experienced? It's not natural primarily. It is mental and inward primarily. And so when we're hearing the book of Isaiah and the prophet saying that there are individuals snared in prison houses, robbed and spoiled, and none says restore, there is a hint here pointing to a necessary exodus. A necessary exodus for something that is to be restored. And what is to be restored is the greater question. We know the answer. But what is to be restored? Just seeing it from the Bible. In the book of Psalm 31 and verse 5. The book of Psalm 31 and verse 5. Psalm 31 and verse 5. Psalm 31 and verse 5 reads, into thine hand I commit my spirit. Thou hast redeemed me, O Lord God of truth. Though here is the answer. So here is the answer. The answer is one's spirit is to suffer redemption. It is the spirit that is to suffer redemption. It is the spirit. That's why in the book of Ephesians, Paul says, put off your former conversation, the old man, which is deceitful, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind. Paul's philosophy is blatantly consistent with what the psalmist is saying. Blatantly consistent. And this goes back to episodes prior where there is an underlying philosophy within the Bible. This underlying philosophy within the Bible is about the redemption of the conversation's conscience, the redemption of the spirit of the mind. There is a surface understanding of what that philosophy is, and there is an underlying main point. And this point of redemption for the conversation's heart and mind, this is the main point. So everything that we have been reviewing thus far has been on point with what the Bible is teaching. Now, on the surface, there is a philosophy of the Bible where the code and the ethic of Moses' approach to the living God and to the character of God is the main scheme. The great percentage of the Bible will always depict the offerings and the sacrifices and the ordinances and the holy or holidays and the traditions and the commandments and the theories and the handwritten whatnots, policies and whatnots as being the manner in which God, quote unquote, is to be honored, approached, and observed. But from what we have been reviewing episodes prior, even our first, is that while this is the major theme of approach within the Bible, this is actually the wrong manner of approach. Yes, the Bible is contradicting itself. And for a very good reason. The reason is because I don't think any of us has or will ever learn anything decent without suffering something indecent. Now, it's up to us to understand what is indecent, however long it takes. But so long as we understand what is indecent, we will never go back to what is indecent, but we will know what is decent. Now, the Bible is the same way. The Bible is written with a philosophy and promoting a God of a religious philosophy that is indecent. This is our test. The authors of this book, they have written in a way where what is indecent is shown to be decent. And I believe that this is the way that it is because we as human beings can only learn right from what is first wrong. We can only learn right from what is first wrong, and it is up to us to make a decision to accept what is wrong and to accept what is right. Now, no one is going to hold us to making a decision. That's not how life works. We can make a decision for right, we can make a decision for wrong, and move on in the path that we choose. But for some of us that really want right, we do well, as the Bible says, to take heed to instruction and to gain wisdom and knowledge from correction. The Bible is written in a way where incorrect religious philosophy dictates its narrative. Incorrect religious philosophy dictates the Bible's narrative. Now, the more that you understand the scheme of the Bible and the more that you understand its context and the illustrations used and the language of those contexts and illustrations, you begin to understand that scheme is a parable. And that parable is a very, very dark saying, illuminating that very, very dark saying. And we have taken the time to piece by piece review from the prophets what the living God was planning to do and is concerning this overarching indecent approach. And we saw that in the book of Isaiah, it was to be overturned and replaced. It was to be overturned and replaced. It was to be overturned and replaced with the spirit of Abraham's philosophy. Now, Moses is the general staple, the general principle. But the general principle that Moses is incorrect. But the general principle that Abraham is correct. Now we understand this. We understand this by what is at stake here concerning what redemption is related to. Now, the redemption is for the conversation. The conversation is to escape religious slavery into a liberated experience where it can know the living God. This is the fulfilling. This Exodus is leading us to the fulfilling of the new covenant promise, where we will have written within us the living God's name and also the knowledge of his character to live and to order ourselves by. So, when we're hearing Paul saying, Christ has redeemed us from the law, we are hearing the realest thing that we can hear. We are hearing the underlying controversy of the matter. Has nothing to do primarily with us naturally, but has everything primarily and firstly to do with our conversation. There is a war for our conversation's heart and mind. There is a war for our conversation's heart and mind because it is through our conversation's heart and mind that we are secularly regulated. It is from the desires and the ambitions of our conversation's conscience that our natural conscience is led. And so, being led many centuries and many times, and even to this point in day, it is still occurring, but being led by that false manner of worship and service to the living God, being led by that, it came to a point in time where an individual studying the scriptures and no longer being pleased with how they were being interpreted and then measured and then given for an example, rose up from the priesthood and said, that which is of the flesh is flesh, and that which is of the spirit is spirit. This one mind put a division between decent and indecent. He did so because he understood that the battle was for the conversation's heart and mind. Wherever the conversation's heart and mind is one, so too is the human being. If the human being can understand that its faith has a conscience, if the human being can understand that its faith must have consciousness, if the human being can understand that the cultivation of their faith means the awareness or the consciousness of their own self, a lot will change. A lot will change. A lot will change because life in and of itself is not as boxed in as what is handwritten. The only scheme to living, as we can see from what goes on, is to live. This is why the illustrations of the birds getting the food from where they get them, and God does not tell them where to go or how to get that food. They just go and they get, and God takes care of them. This is where the illustration of nature comes in because it is pointing to our conversation. Our conversation is looking to be fed. Our conversation, we believe, must be fed. Our conversation, we believe, must be dictated to. But these illustrations of nature, which we can also make for our own self, reveals that nature takes care of its own. It does not think. It lives. And this is why we, in times prior, went through those verses saying in the book of Proverbs, keep my commandments and live. Keep my commandments and live. Because the point now is shifted. It is shifted to where the conversation has become the primary issue. The conversation and how it is handled and maintained, how it is cared for, that has become the primary issue to the mind of the Bible. So when we're hearing Paul saying in the book of Galatians chapter 3, Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law. And then in the next verse, Paul says, to give us the blessing of Abraham. So there's a transition here that we have to acknowledge. We have to acknowledge the transition that the Bible is going in. Moses was cool. Moses was hot. Moses was hot. But if Moses was still hot, Paul would say Christ has redeemed us from the law that we may receive the blessing of Moses. And that literally makes no sense. Because the conversation is to be redeemed out of that slavery. If Paul is putting this context of redemption from the philosophy of the religious law, he's letting us know that the slavery our faith is enduring, is connected to the philosophy of the religious law. Let go of that slavery and we inherit the blessing of Abraham. The blessing of Abraham was creation, not, he says in the book of Romans chapter 4, through the philosophy of the religious law, but through the righteousness of faith. In essence, in complete essence, our mind is to be redeemed. And in full essence, the mind of our faith is to be repurchased. Our faith, we, nobody but us, we have sold our faith to theological theories, to handwritten principles, and to an abolished scheme of an approach to the living God. It is abolished. How is it abolished? Ephesians 2 and verse 15. Galatians 3:13 and 14. That body crucified figuratively illustrates that abolished philosophy of Moses. And don't think Moses as I'm singling out Moses. Our churches today are operated by what is called church manuals. These are still handwritten philosophies that are currently not well for our faith, so long as we remain by them. The Bible is calling for a liberated conversation. The liberated conversation moves away from what is associated with Moses. And again, our churches today and our traditional habits are associated with the philosophy of Moses. The Bible is calling for an association with Abraham, not with Moses. Abraham obtained everything, and that promise, not through any religious law, but through the exercising of his faith. Same for us. We have a promise of having something written within, and for the purpose of knowing the one doing the writing, and it cannot come from any religious law, but it can only come through an exercising of our faith. That means we have to actually get out of our head. We have to actually stop the physical stuff, and we have to actually know what we believe. This is why I reviewed again before in the book of Isaiah, I will make darkness light before them, then they shall put their gods away. This is all related to our conversation. Our conversation is what is to suffer redemption, and more specifically, the mind of our conversation's faith is what is to suffer redemption. We are to be redeemed from the slavery of the traditional thought that we now know and handle, and move, carrying that exodus, to the liberty of an experience that can think and that can feel independently for knowing. And through feeling, going through that sorrow of not knowing, fighting for an understanding of what the living God is and is to us. This is justification. This is justification through and through.